Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. Today we're discussing minimum viable products, MVPs is what we're calling them, and their role in successful product development. We're going to start with a couple of questions. I just kind of want to introduce everybody. We're back with Connor, we have Camille, we have Paul. Really happy to have actually somebody on the engineering side to talk about some of these topics with us. So excited to see. So let's talk about like understanding the actual concept of an MVP. I'm going to leave it to you two first. How about we define what an MVP is and really the origin of where this came from?
I actually think that the name MVP is super unfortunate. When Eric Ries released Lean Startup, he used a word that I think was already being used kind of in industry, MVP, to stand for minimum viable product. And if you've read that book, he does not describe a product that you would take into market at all as an MVP. It is only for a test. The concept is you develop something, whether you write code or you use a no code, not with the idea of I'm going to make money from this, but I'm going to learn whether or not this is a product that anyone would want. That's its only purpose. And you do the very smallest amount possible, the minimum, because you don't want to spend a bunch of money on something until you know if somebody wants it. I think we talked about that in an earlier episode. Unfortunately, I think the usage of the word product meant that for a lot of people, it just means like less than we want for as far as features, just less features. And that is what makes it minimum, is the minimum amount of features that we think are critical versus something that's not intended to be necessarily a product at all. You want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I feel like MVP's gone the way of the world, which is business people took it and figured out how to stuff it into how do I earn the most money as fast as possible with the most visibility into that process. And so MVP is now that thing.
Right.
It's that thing that accomplishes that business goal.
Oh, it's a magic thing.
Yeah,
right?
it's
You
magic.
don't have to spend very much money on it, but it's going to come.
And we can set a date for it so people can do it faster. I'm reading, here's the definition that was originally coined. This is what I think of. Version of a new product which allows a team to collect the maximum amount of validated learning about customers with the least effort.
That's
It's like
perfect.
a prototype.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's literally a prototype.
Just
It is.
literally just
So, and,
a prototype with a purpose.
If he had called it a prototype, would the word prototype now mean that
Right.
Minimum viable prototype.
Yeah, did it get coined and then the target gets shifted?
yeah.
Prototype would just be
The new
this
target.
one thing now,
Yeah, right. Yeah, like all the features that you can fit in and take it to market.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a concept about how this happens with language around like people who have disabilities. The word for a long time was retarded. It meant that their abilities were retarded, but that word had all the negative connotations, and then people use it as an insult, and then we have to come up with a new word because the word loses the desired meaning. I'm rambling, but
Nope.
that's what's happening with MVP.
Totally.
So
What's happened?
that's a great definition.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty. Like, we're a learning shop here. We love learning. And so the goal is not get to market as fast as possible. The goal is to make a scalable, repeatable business model. And maybe part of that for you is getting to market as fast as possible.
So
But likely not.
let me ask, because I think for a lot of people, if they already have a business model, I think a part of the challenge for a lot of organizations as you try and use an MVP, if you think, well, I don't need to validate my business model, right? So now I'm just looking for what can I get to market as quick.
Yep.
Which I think is still a mistake, because even if you have a validated business model, each new feature that you put out, you still have that same set of assumptions around. But I'm wondering, is that part of the challenge for people when understanding what an MVP is? Because they think, I already have a scalable business model.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I would ask, my immediate thought would be, what's the business goal, and how does innovation help you reach that business goal? Like, why are you innovating? For what purpose? When I was at Ancestry, Margot Georgiadis was our CEO, and one of the first things she said was, we're going to continue optimizing and getting incremental innovations, but big innovations need to be at least $200 million ideas. Because we're doing some number that's a few X's larger than that in revenue a year. And so she's saying we need to increase, like, any big ideas that we're going to invest in, need to increase that by some double-digit percentage. And so we have a target, right? So you weren't allowed to come up with an idea that was like, I pitched something one time to their little board, and they were like, someone said, I think this is a $50 million idea. And Margot said, do you have a response to that? And I said, I think it's a $50 million idea. And she said, okay, we're not doing it.
Not enough.
Oh, interesting.
It's not big enough. We can't put 20 people on a $50 million idea. We need to put 20 people on a $200 million idea.
I wonder, though, if most organizations are savvy enough to think of innovation that way, right? Innovation, for the most part, is this nebulous, like, thing that they hope will happen.
Yeah.
And I just don't think people think about it that
There are
way.
also different degrees of innovation, right? Like, as product people, you can have an idea for some path for customers or whatever they're doing. As engineers, you can have a really innovative idea that nobody ever sees because you just solved a really quick problem in a circle. You know, like, you pulled in some library and used it in a way that nobody had considered before. Like, innovation has really small aspects to it that I feel like kind of just don't get seen very often. It can, at least, because the big innovative ideas, the $200 million ideas, those are usually whole customer flows. Right. It's a whole thing, but like, get the data from here to here sometimes requires genuine innovation by engineers.
No, that's like actually, and I think that's more in that incremental innovation.
Yep, exactly.
Which there's nothing wrong with incremental innovation. I think we talked about in an earlier episode, like, you don't get to this kind of a cell phone if you don't start with a big brick cell phone. You have to develop the underlying technology, and then you can continually increment. And we don't have big breakthrough innovation anymore with cell phones, almost at all. And we probably won't, because
the tech's there.
Right. Like,
Just need to be on my glasses.
Well, that was the thing.
There you go.
In a previous job, we actually had there was an icebreaker topic once that we talked about, and it was what one thing that's common now do you think will be strange in 20 years? And my thing is, holding your device, I think, will be a really strange concept. Like, all your integration with data and all of that is just going to be in your glasses, in your whatever, wherever it's fed to you. But we're so used to it. I know, right?
Cyborg part of my brain.
Yeah.
Yeah, like an attachment that we.
Yeah, my brother has this theory that we are all cyborgs already. He's like, define it, right? And it's like technological adaptations to who you are as a human being. He's like, literally, that's just your phone.
Yeah.
like before, like, people from 50 years ago couldn't just pull up their phone and find information. Like, they had to go to the library. Mm-hmm. You've augmented your brain with your phone. So.
Yeah. But what's that quote from Steve Jobs? It's like, the iPhone is the bicycle of the mind.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Mm-hmm. It allows you to do so much more. I mean, you don't have your phone, you feel really hamstrung in anything you're trying to do.
Yeah.
Right? Especially if you're around other people with phones.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
If it's just me doing my hippie stuff.
Yeah, camping.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
Not that big of a deal. But if I'm trying to be a hippie at the mall, like, everyone's way ahead of me on that.
Yeah.
So with MVPs, like, what did they actually do for you? Like, in the development process for your teams, because we have this process of, like, the minimum viable product, right? The least amount of features that we're shipping. How does that actually serve a team?
Paul and I have talked about this before. Paul, to rephrase the question, like, what value does the results of an MVP give the engineering team?
Yeah.
Like we've shipped our prototype, and then we come back with whatever we've learned. What does that do for the team, in your opinion? For the engineers.
For the engineers.
Yeah.
Well, I think, that there's similar wins for the engineering team that are for anyone that's working on the product. They get to see the little wins, right? They see, it's kind of like with chess. It's hard to think 20 moves ahead.
Yeah.
And for engineers, it's the same. You're trying to design a system, and you have a chance. Okay, we've gotten to this point. Now we can look down the road a little bit farther. We take those learnings, and we can see. There's so many options with so many buzzwords in engineering of things that you can do, whether it's with scalability, security, the list goes on. You're able to narrow your focus and say, this particular thing actually matters to us. So we're going to design and optimize that thing really specifically now, as opposed to just trying to solve it all at once, which is the same as on the product side, right? Like you're trying to kind of put your line out there to say, are we going to get any bites? And then engineering's the same. You don't want to try to create this empire of a system before you even know what you're building.
Do you think sometimes it is hard for engineers, though, to think about an MVP? Because in my experience, it's really hard to get, especially if people have gotten bit in the butt with not, the technical debt that gets acquired.
Yeah.
Because you really have to say, hey, we're not going to engineer this for the future.
Yeah.
Right? We're only engineering it for this moment in time.
Yeah.
Do you think that's because I've had some developers that I work with that they're kind of like, well, what are we doing about security? What are we doing about, manageability? What are we doing to make sure that this can live on? And you're like, well, maybe we don't want it to live on, right?
Exactly. No, that's it. Getting into tech, that was one of the first eye-opening things for me, was seeing that a lot of the kind of pop culture in tech was driven around kind of reactions to hyperscale, right? So engineers at Google, who are these leading minds in the industry, have had to run all these scalability problems.
Right.
And now there's all these popular topics about how do we engineer at scale? And that trickles down to the whole engineering culture.
Yeah,
Everyone
now
wants to
everyone's
be
worried
like
about
that.
scale, right? Yeah, exactly.
But you're not there yet. That's an opportunity. That's the privilege of the future, right?
Privilege
Would
of the future.
it be safe to say that MVPs aren't built to be scaled?
Absolutely.
So then you're doing a test. So because you mentioned it before, when we get out an MVP and we're doing this test, how do you consume the learnings compared to because we can give you a report on what we found out, but what does that even mean to an engineer?
I don't know that it's terribly different. I mean, it tells us what parts of the application are critical to the experience of the user. If the engineers, and this is a separate conversation, but if the engineers are attached to the engineering is a tool. It's just helping us create an experience for the user. If they're attached to that, they're going to see, this part of the app is now this is what they care about, and I'm going to spend a lot more time designing from an engineering perspective, bells and whistles and scaling and redundancy, blah blah blah.
That's where they are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if this other part that 5% of the users use breaks or has an issue, it's not as big of a deal. And that as that 5% goes from that 5% represents 5 people to 5 million people, then you start going that part of the product is significant enough to handle an engineering team just trying to make that system robust instead of just saying, we'll get to that. Yeah.
Yeah. What's his name? Paul Graham, the founder of YC, talks about this. It's like this idea of when someone says, well, that won't work when we have 100,000 customers. It's like, we would be so privileged to have 100,000 customers.
Yeah.
Tell me more about this fantasy.
Yeah.
I would like to be there. And that's fine. It is important to think about. What I think is tough is we often don't document when we say, but we need the thing that works for our next 1,000 customers. Like, we need 1,000 customers before we can worry about 10,000, before we can worry about 100,000.
Mm-hmm.
And if we know that we're making some scalability trade-off, it'd be great to document that. But it kind of just becomes tribal knowledge, or it's just lost until we remember it when we get to 100,000 customers, if we do.
I think some of it is it's apparent between the product strategy and the engineering team. There's some products that are brand new that you would want to put an extremely robust system around.
Yeah.
Trying to remember the crypto company that did like a Super Bowl ad and like crushed their system.
Oh yeah.
Right? But that's something you can anticipate.
Yeah.
You know that you're trying to scale quickly instead of just like with a prototype. Typically you're just throwing it out, getting a couple people. But if you're saying, oh, we actually want this to launch to go from beta to like millions of people, the engineering for that's going to look very different.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, and to go on the Super Bowl and not be ready for scale would be pretty. I worked on this thing with Schwann's Foods a couple of years ago. They were going to be the featured business on The Apprentice, and they knew that there was data that came out of that The Apprentice team would tell you, when you're on our show, you're gonna get 1 million or 2 million hits during the show on your website.
Wow.
Because it was a big
Cool.
show at the time, and so there was a lot of scale. Like, we had a ton of scaling that we were doing to make sure that we were ready for 2-3 million people to hit their website all at the same time, and to be placing orders. Right, they didn't have that ability to be able to handle that kind of scale. So we had to plan. But coming back to your point, we used to, when we would do design sprints to identify kind of an MVP features, we would take the business through an engineering-led exercise to prioritize the non-functional attributes and document the decisions that we were making about what was important on the non-functional attribute side, so that all the way through, like the MVP, the engineers would know, oh, we're not emphasizing security right now. In fact, we're ignoring security altogether and being explicit about it back to the business. This is not a secure application. We didn't build any security into this, so that down the road there wouldn't be any surprises at the point when you have to decide, okay, our MVP is successful. Now we need to start engineering it. Here's all the trade-offs we already made all the way along the way, so that we could, go back and
fix it.
and not get caught flat-footed when you're like, oh, well, how did we get to all these customers and we don't have security built in?
Yeah.
We made that choice.
Yeah. Can I soapbox?
Yeah. So that's what a podcast is.
If I'm gonna write a blog post someday, it's gonna be called "The Problem with Prototypes." Here's the problem. The problem is not the prototype. One of the biggest problems I think we face in startups and businesses, not everyone understands the vision. One. Okay. Actually, not a huge issue in the immediate term. Over a long time, if you don't have a cohesive vision, that's a problem. But in the immediate, I don't think that's a big deal. The bigger deal is not many people don't actually understand what strategy is.
Agreed.
It's much more about how you do something. And so not understanding the strategy in the immediate term is an issue. So because a lot of people don't understand what strategy really is, so then it's not communicated very well. This is the cascading effect. So then the team doesn't understand the strategy very well, and they want to. We want to understand, how are we going to accomplish our business goals? Not how are we going to build the thing? How are we going to deliver value to our customers to accomplish our business goals as strategy? And so if people don't understand that, they try to fill in, because we want that kind of
Mm-hmm.
confidence, or at least something to hold on to. So then you see an MVP or a prototype whose purpose, right, to revisit the purpose is like literally almost just learning, like learn the things we need to move to the next stage.
Uh-huh.
And so that prototype may or may not fit into your strategy.
Mm.
So you ship a prototype to learn something because you need to,
Mm.
or you do a non-coded prototype and everyone sees it to learn something. That's it.
Right.
And then people are trying to fill into the strategy. Oh, our strategy must be this thing because we're building it.
Interesting.
And then it's not. It's not. The purpose of the MVP is not to solve all of your business problems. It's just to like get something in front of customers and a means to get you closer to a repeatable scale of business.
So that is interesting because I recently had a conversation with an executive here where he was inferring the strategy
Yes.
based on the MVP,
Yes.
right? And saying, well, I didn't think this was our strategy. Here, obviously, our MVP is showcasing that strategy.
Yes.
That's interesting. That's a great perspective. I think you're right. So how do you counteract that?
You have to get good at strategy.
But don't you also have to get good at communication?
Yes, absolutely. And you have to get good at making the connections, because it's one thing to communicate a strategy. If you leave up to chance the connection of strategy to your MVP or strategy to your prototype or learnings or current product or roadmap, then you're leaving it up to chance. Like, why leave your success up to chance when you can literally just say, our strategy is to accomplish these 3 things. Here's how we're going to do it. Here's how we're not going to do it. And here's how this thing that we're building today that you know about layers into that.
Right.
And then they can say, okay, I get it. And then you can have a productive conversation.
It also just highlights that importance of doing readouts about what the learnings are, because then you can continually tie the learning cycle back to that strategy and be reiterating that strategy.
Yep.
Again.
That's a Steve Jobs quote, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's an element too of even once you know the strategy, sometimes, amongst the leadership group, you can think that everything is getting communicated out and it's happening frequently. Because you're thinking about it all the time.
Right.
But even if you just say it once, that's not necessarily, we said it, a month ago. This is how it's going to play out with the MVP, and this is why we're doing it. If it's not something that's kind of like a part of the process to continually discuss the strategy of the why, it still gets lost. At least, especially for engineers, because they're in this different place, solving these different problems, and hopefully, you'd hope they'd be able to keep that connection. But no one can.
I agree.
Having that repeated contact with the strategy is really important.
It's so interesting to watch videos of mountaineers doing first ascents of peaks, like the actual mountain. It's like they go to Baffin Island or something, right? Or they're in Antarctica, and they're way back, right? And they always bring their whatever they need, binoculars or something, and they're trying to identify lines to take, because you don't want to get cliffed out. You don't want to get stuck. You're in the middle of nowhere. So you're trying to, and they do this in skiing too, right? And typically people, right? They're going to hike up one side, climb one side, and ski down. Hopefully both lines are continuous. And so, but half the videos that you see now, they've picked their line and they'll literally either have a picture of it and they'll draw on it the line that they're going to take. And then you'll see them on the wall later and they're looking at it. And now they're this far away, right? The mountain's next to their face.
Yeah.
And then it's this doesn't look nearly as good as it did in the telephoto lens.
Yeah, sure.
And that's what I think that's what you're saying. The developers are the mountain climbers, and so is the whole team. And we're all standing back here and we're saying, this is our mountain, we think. And we think this is our rough path. And the path is the strategy. And you get your tools ready and you go on there and you make it a third of the way up and you go, oh, wow.
Yeah.
I wish I could stand, 2 miles that way right now to know if I should go left, right, or down, because we're not going up.
Yeah.
And so it's hard.
Is that part of the usefulness? I'm curious about this as far as like the MVP, the strategy of an MVP itself, right? Because like it's been my experience that engineers don't like to throw away code. And so if we build this MVP solution that gets us information, if the end goal is to pivot and then build the thing after, like what's the best way for engineers to hold on to the things that they learned halfway up the mountain so that they can actually build a tool set for it?
Right, and not feel like they've lost all
exactly. Like I did all this work and now it's gone.
Some of that is just in communication and in them understanding the purpose of what they're writing.
Mm-hmm.
With prototypes, I mean, largely the intention is that this may not be used in the future. And, to what we were talking about before about like, we're not going to like go all the way in on trying to make this super robust. The engineers are going to hate that. And actually, a lot of the time they're like, yes, please, like, can we do this right? Now that we know what we're going to be building, can we actually build this the right way?
Mm-hmm.
It also helps if whatever they're working on, and this is kind of like a double benefit of having a small prototype. If someone spends 6 months working on something and then you throw it away, that hurts.
Mm-hmm.
If they spend 2 weeks and you throw it away and say, this is a stepping stone to make this next thing great, and it's like, oh, this is palatable because now we're gonna spend 6, whatever the next time increment is, on something that's gonna probably stick around a little longer.
Well, and then in that mindset, like you likely also have the lessons that you learned solving that problem that you can still take with you, right? It's still in your immediate memory.
I think that engineers rightly have a lack of trust with the business that the prototype won't end up becoming or the MVP, even worse, won't end up becoming the actual product.
Yep.
And that they'll get stuck with all the short-sighted good decisions at the time, but that represent technical debt.
Yeah. And to be fair, like I think a lot of times I think the reason a lot of engineers are jaded, like you said, sometimes rightly so, is that the consequences, the bad consequences of the decisions that business leaders make don't get eaten by the business leaders.
No, they get eaten
the
by
tech team has to just figure it out. They're like, I don't care that it's not maintainable. Right? Like, you just get to figure it out.
No, we don't have time to stop for maintainability.
6 months later, business leaders aren't going to be like happy to hear a conversation from the engineers about, oh, well, guess what? Like, this is going to take 6 months because of what you did. That conversation just never goes.
That conversation
goes well. And so engineers end up working late hours and kind of get gaslighted into these like bad situations because they saw the problem ahead of time, were told no, and then, oh, too bad. Guess what? You're going to get it.
Well, and
anyway.
I have told people before that somebody told me developers came up with the phrase technical debt because they thought the business would understand that. And I said, well, you used the wrong phrase because business people are okay with using debt. In fact, they're used to incurring debt
to start the business
with the idea that it's okay to have debt, right? Yeah. It's not like you got a bunch of like Ramsey like people out there like being terrified of debt. They're not terrified of debt. So you need a different phrase that communicates the impact of the decision that the business can that'll resonate with them, because it's not a phrase that resonates with business people.
Or at least not what the truth of that statement is.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. I mean, getting out of debt, you just get more money.
Yeah.
You can't just more money your way immediately out of technical debt. I kind of think you can more money your way or more customers your way out of some technical debt. And this is the wisdom of Paul.
Okay.
Technical debt is a privilege.
Yeah, I agree.
Paul
yeah.
Like that's it. And so
if you survive.
if you survive, so like obviously when you take on debt as a business, financial debt, you have some kind of financial plan for that debt. But usually we don't.
Yeah.
Like we don't have some kind of technology plan for technical debt.
Yes.
We just incur it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's different. What's hard with on the technical side, and it's challenging for engineering to communicate, is there's different kinds of technical debt. There's some that's really easy to replace, and there's other things that even if you were being really mindful about, as security as an example, some of those problems can be like in the core of what you're building. And so you might build this really elegant system on top of it, having iterated many times, and then you've got something that's kind of in the core of it now affects the entire application, and you want to go try to fix it. That kind of debt, it's like compounding interest.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, we're taking on like this really bad type of debt. We need to be cognizant of it, and hopefully, with customers, we'll be able to have the team and the money to be able to actually solve this problem. In the end, if the business doesn't survive, then like technical debt doesn't matter. So
it seems
just
to
getting it out is
me
important.
when you're talking about MVPs, it would be very beneficial to have developers more embrace the original meaning of the word, because ideally, the less you engineer, the less likely you are to end up with an MVP that's laden with technical debt, because ideally there should be no question that the MVP could be used as a real product, right? Because then you don't, I think that the reason that the business people get to that point is we do tend to over-engineer MVPs so that they can be an actual usable, semi-viable product. If all of us product people and software developers and everybody involved is aggressive about making sure that any MVP is absolutely just a prototype and cannot be used, then you could ensure that the next iteration you say, okay, now what do we want to engineer for? Yeah. What are our short-term or long-term strategy around how to develop this so that we can choose the right things to do at the right time, and not kind of, because it's really natural to, you can see how you could end up in that situation like again and again and again.
Totally.
But it's part of it is because everybody's misusing the word and misunderstanding specifically the business people. But even I do believe that the developers are partially to blame because if something does take you 3 to 6 months, of course the business people are going to have an expectation. I can reuse, right? I just spent $500,000 building that thing, and you're telling me it's a complete throwaway?
Now we're going to build from the ground up again.
We're going to build right. Whereas if they had spent $20,000, it's easy to say that's just a prototype. We're throwing it away. Yeah. Now we can start engineering around the problem because we've validated that there's not an opportunity here.
So is that one of the key components of like a successful MVP, is being able to keep the cost down, the time down?
Depends on what you're trying to learn and how fast.
That's fair.
And how big your customer base is, and
I just think it's dangerous to invest very much in an MVP because then the business rightly has an expectation that there should be reusability there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And in a way, the problem where developers don't want to throw away code is the same problem the business has. Yeah. They don't want to throw away investment dollars, right? And if they've invested in something having security or maintainability, then they say, well, now you're just going to throw all this away, and so.
It's a lot harder for people to see learnings as like the key thing that you're trying to do with starting a business, right? Because it's like so ephemeral. You can't touch it. There's no result. It's like, oh, like we're just smarter about what we're trying to do now, and that doesn't feel as as valuable. What's crazy, even on the engineering side, if I have a prototype of something that like has a really clear spec of here's what we're trying to build, the ability for an engineering team to build that is like 5x faster.
Sure.
Because you just all of the laboring over what the requirements are and how they work together. If I've got a clear prototype, and I've seen this a couple of times where I've had it, and the business leader before me that has me come onto this project is like, "Oh, you did that so fast." And I'm like, I appreciate that you think I'm really good. I like that, but also like the work that they did kind of leapfrogged me.
Yes.
Because I didn't have to ask all of these questions. We have to have all this back and forth.
Right.
I could just go in, build it, in 2 weeks. What took 3 months for you guys to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And so that, I think the learning's part of it, I feel like it's for engineers and on the business side can get undervalued.
Well, it's like Connor always says, especially for the business, it's the line in the water thing, right? I can't catch the fish if I don't have my line in the water. Building feels like a line in the water. Learning feels like just
And then
looking
we-
at the dock of
Yeah.
And then we wonder why when we release the thing that we rushed as fast as possible to ship, that it doesn't work and our customers don't like it. It's like, oh, we should have just taken a little time and something lower fidelity and just gotten it out there. And even if, I think that, happy path, sad path. Happy path is like, you hear something from a customer that sparks something. You talk to some developers about it or some people on your team, they think it's interesting. You do some interviews, you corroborate it more. You do your surveys, you corroborate it more. You build a non-technical prototype. People love exactly what you built right away. Then you build a semi-technical lo-fi prototype. People still like it. And then you ship the MVP and then it lands. Like happy path. But it's just never that easy. Like that would be wonderful. I'm going to read this quote. This is Steve Jobs. We should do this thing where whenever we read a quote, you have to guess who it is.
Okay, that's fun.
So
I like that.
we tried to, anyways, you know who this is? Old Stevie. We tried to make something much more holistic and simple. When you first start off trying to solve a problem, the first solutions you come up with are very complex, and most people stop there.
Oh, interesting.
But if you keep going and live with the problem and peel more layers of the onion off, you can oftentimes arrive at some very elegant and simple solutions.
That's interesting.
So it's like you build your MVP and it's like, okay, why doesn't it work? And it's like, yeah, like this is the Frankenstein of 17 people at this company.
Yeah.
Like that's like it's going to do something. We hope it does something meaningful, but it might just be teaching us what they don't like or what they're looking for that they can't get to easily or what things they would put together or whatever it is.
So
Simplify.
with that, I think that we are looking at maybe continuing this conversation later.
I'm me.
Yeah, I think everybody needs to take off. So I would love to continue this conversation genuinely.